Airborne in Aldbourne. Now I'm aware that a considerable number of you in the audience will have an awareness of the Airborne in Aldbourne because of how you're dressed. The 506 Parachute Infantry arrived in Aldbourne in September 1943, and as far as I can make out, and I'm open to people to tell me otherwise, we think they arrived after it got dark, because the general consensus is they weren't here one day and they were here the next. And they were here for almost 12 months. It was the Normandy campaign that took them out of the village. But basically it was September 43 through to September 44, with 4-6 weeks in Normandy for those that managed to come back from Normandy. To give you an idea of the figures for casualties, the 3rd Battalion, 506, took 690 men into Normandy on June 6, 1944, and 290 men came back. That's not to say the 400 that didn't come back were all killed, but a considerable number were killed, and a lot were injured. Some of those made it back to the unit after they'd recuperated. A lot were shipped straight back to the States, and obviously a lot were left in France. So there we see the table of organisation for the 101st Airborne Division. 101st had 3 parachute infantry regiments within its ranks. The 506 was one of those. And just like the other two, the 506 had 3 battalions, each battalion formed of 3 companies plus a headquarters company. Now the companies that are highlighted in yellow are the companies that were in Aldbourne. So you had 1st Battalion A Company and B Company, with C Company in Ramsbury, headquarters company at Lipcote House. 2nd Battalion, D Company, E Company, F Company and headquarters company were here in the village. So 2nd Battalion alone counts for approximately 700 men. Add the other half of 1st Battalion in and you're getting close to 1,000 men. 3rd Battalion were entirely in Ramsbury. And if you look around the room, you'll probably see a couple of these insignias being worn. These are the insignias that the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment wore. They were part of the 101st Airborne Division, so they wore the division's Screaming Eagle patch. But they had their own insignia, which was the 506 Paradise patch. It was called a Paradise because there's a parachute and a dice. 506. Which is, I think it's quite a smart design even today. It's got kind of Walt Disney connotations to it, so whoever did it knew what they were doing. They came over in September of 43 on board the SS Samaria. And as David Kenyon Webster described in his book, it was old, grey, sooty and dishevelled. They had a terrible trip. It was 10 days of hot bedding, where basically the person who got out and you got in. It was so dank and damp and just disgusting on board that their underwear was turning black within 3 days. So they really were glad to get off there when they arrived in Liverpool. And prior to arriving, most of them, if not all of them, received a copy of this little book, A Short Guide to Great Britain by the War and Navy Department, Washington, D.C. And inside, one of the opening sentences is, "You are going to Britain as part of an Allied offensive, to meet Hitler and beat him on his own ground. For the time being, you will be Britain's guest. The purpose of this guide is to start you getting acquainted with the British, their country, and their ways." And it's quite an interesting little book. Very well written, considering when it was published. And interestingly, in the back of it, it notes that the idea for the publication actually came from Great Britain, because when the first members of the RAF went over to America to learn to fly, they were given a similar publication about how to get to know the Americans, which, as Jim will tell you, are quite a strange breed. There are also items like this which could be purchased to supplement that kind of book. This is Britain, a souvenir for overseas forces, and that was available nationally. I've actually been given 2 copies by veterans, so I know it had quite a wide circulation. And interestingly, you go through it and it gives a picture of a village, a town, a hamlet, a church. Nowhere is labelled for where it is. But the town they use to show a town is actually Marlborough, which is quite interesting. It's taken from the top of St Peter's Church, looking down the High Street. So, a bird's eye view of Aldbourne. This is a pre-war postcard, but Aldbourne, when the 506 arrived, would not have looked vastly different to this. And as one of the guys who was here in the 506 wrote to me once, they arrived at night. When I woke up, I thought I'd been transported to a Hollywood movie set. You can imagine, I'm not sure how many of the reenactors here have actually seen the village green yet, but to arrive here in the dark, in the blackout, having travelled 10 days on the Samaria, travelled down on a troop train, been loaded onto a truck, you're brought into the village, given a stable, a tent, a Nissen hut, a private house, whatever. You're absolutely whacked, just want to go to sleep. You wake up the following morning and you look out on the village green. I mean, it must have been quite mind-blowing for some of the guys who come from the likes of New Mexico and some of the more rugged United States states. Here we see West Street. This is a postcard that was provided by a veteran that he bought when he was here. Interestingly, the garage just here, late Molly Lunn, who lived in the village, that one day there was a US Army fuel tanker there, and it was either filling jerry cans or it was putting fuel into the tanks for the garage, one or the other. And it caught fire, and as you can imagine, with a petrol tanker, mass panic ensued. But fortunately, a GI came past in a jeep, saw what was going on, jumped into the truck, started it and drove it off. Now I don't know any more than that, but there is some conjecture that that GI in the jeep was actually General Maxwell Taylor, the commander of the 101st Airborne. But again, it's another one of these stories which is, the detail has been lost over time, and we probably never know the detail in terms of being 100% accurate. And there's the crown and the pond. Not substantially changed today. Still recognise it as the same place. And of course St Michael's Church and the village green. And that's virtually the view which anybody who'd been billeted in the Hightown Stables complex would have seen when they came out of the gate of the stables. And that's where tomorrow we will be undertaking our encampment reenactment. So, the 506 came to the village, and most of the officers were billeted either in Hightown House or were placed with the local populace. Basically, if you had a spare room, there was no debate about it. It was requisitioned and utilised. And if you weren't an officer, as I've said there, 3 types of accommodation generally available in Aldbourne to the discerning enlisted GI visitor of 1943-44. You have a Nissen hut. That's the wife. She's actually been feeding our son, so I'm not, it's understandable. Right, we have a Nissen hut, top right. That is actually a Nissen hut on Farm Lane Camp in Aldbourne, used by medics of the 506. We have stables. These are the stables within the Hightown Stables complex, and that is the last surviving block that still exists, and that photograph was taken in 1990. Now, since that picture was taken, there's a cottage has been built here, as some of you who came over a few years ago will remember. But that was one of 6 similar-sized stable blocks that were used by the 506. And they accommodated at least a whole company of 506 men. There were nominally 4 men per stable, and those particular stables there would have been numbers 7 through 12, left to right. And at the bottom we have the bell tent. Now, I don't have an awful lot of detail as to where the bell tents were situated in the village. I would imagine they went up and came down as they were required. But I do believe there was some on the Farmer Lane camp at some point. And here we see a member of the 506 coming into the Hightown stable complex. It's a very poor picture. Just to the left of the cursor arrow, you can see up here, that's Hightown House. The entrance to the stable is just here. And that's PFC Charles Sire, who was A Company 506. He's got his overcoat on, and he's got his kit bag over his shoulder. And Charlie Sire fought with A Company from Normandy right the way through in Holland, Bastogne, and carried on and died in April 45 in action, killed in action in Germany. So a few more weeks and he'd have made it through. And this is Hightown House that you saw in the previous picture. Again, that was pictured in 1990 before the development on the site and before the house was renovated. But that house was taken over by the 506 as the officers' mess. And a little later I'll show you a photograph, it might even be the next one if I remember correctly, of some 506 officers outside the porch on the pathway leading down. And you can just make out a sign above the doorway that says Officers' Mess. Now when we came and had a look around Hightown House, maybe about 6 years ago now, the nails that held the sign saying Officers' Mess were still in the top of the porchway, just there. Amazing. There was the next one. So there's David Galano. It's common to both pictures, kneeling here, stood here. And I've put red circles around every guy photographed who was killed in action. And where I've listed their name, I've put their name in red, just to give you some indication of the losses sustained and how many men actually knew Aldbourne as their last home. It's quite sobering when you go through the photographs. But this is the sign above the doorway saying Officers' Mess. And David Galanu sent me those photographs in September 93 in a really chatty letter, really detailed about his reminiscences, and I thought, this is going to be quite a coup contacting this guy, he's going to be full of information. I wrote back to him and the letter came back that he died in between sending me the first letter and me responding, passed away. Great shame. And there's a larger shot of the 6 surviving stables. As I said, these are 7 through 12, and it'll be interesting tomorrow when we go in there to have a look and see in the inside what signs of American occupation there is. And here we have a view of the village from the east, and I've put a red circle around the Hightown stable complex. Now, until 2 weeks ago, this was the only picture I could find of the Hightown stable complex. So if anybody here has a better one, I'd love to see it and I would love a copy. But you can just make out the ranks of stable blocks there, with one down the side as well. So that's an interesting picture, and that, again, that came from a veteran as well. It was a postcard he bought in the village during the war. And here we are within the stable complex, men of A Company 506, 2 different groups, various individuals photographed, and again there's some red circles there over those guys that never came back. But some of the guys pictured are quite active. This guy called Ted Vetland. Ted, very active in the 506 Association post-war and organised their annual reunions, and as far as I'm aware, still does. And here we see 2 likely characters outside stable number 9, Actually, it's a good job the picture's not that clear because the pin-up on the wall is quite disgusting. Sergeant Robert Impink and PFC John Powers, outside stall number 9. And when we, because the stable will be open tomorrow, Michael Steadman, the owner, has very generously agreed to make them available for the public to look in. You'll see that the stables really haven't changed at all. I mean, you know, you could say, well, what is there to change in a stable? But when you remember there were 6 blocks and there's only 1 left, they could be gone. But they're not. They're still there at the moment, and they're largely as they were. And here's some photographs of them, present day, supplied by Michael Steadman. And a quote at the top from Donald Burgett's book, Currahee. A sergeant took us through a gate in a brick wall. This, he told us, used to be a stables for a mansion. Each stable had a Dutch-type door in front of a small window on either side of it. They were the best barracks I'd ever been in. He goes on to say that each stable comfortably held 4 men. And the most amazing revelation was that you only had to share your life with 3 other people, rather than being in a barrack block with 30 people, 50 people. There was a degree of privacy in these stables that the guys had never known before in the service, and probably never knew again. Another bunch inside the stable complex, and this is in the courtyard where Sarson Cottage is now built. Hightown House would be to the left. The stables are visible behind the men, have all gone bar one of them on the very end. And you can see the guys there look like they're all doing a can-can. They're all putting their left leg in, and they're all wearing leggings, which if you look at any of the reenactors here today that are portraying American Airborne, they're all wearing these high-leg combat boots, corcoran jump boots. These were the status symbol of the American Airborne. Once you qualified as a paratrooper, you were eligible to wear these boots and to blouse your trousers into them. And that was the mark that set the paratrooper apart from other US soldiers. But when the 506 first came to Aldbourne and Ramsbury, they were told not to wear their jump boots, but to wear leggings. They also were prevented from wearing the 101st Airborne patch, and, amazingly, they were told not to talk to civilians because there was a genuine concern that in the local area, somewhere, there was a female German agent. And whilst it was never confirmed that she was operating, the men were made to maintain this charade for a couple of weeks, I believe. And here they are having a laugh about wearing their leggings. Now it's interesting that if you were in another branch of the service and you managed to buy steel purloin, get given a pair of corcoran jump boots or equivalent manufacture, you were a very brave man if you wore them anywhere where the American Airborne were, because being the status symbol they were, if you were caught wearing them and you weren't a paratrooper, there was a fairly high chance you would have them forcibly removed and you'd walk home with no shoes on. You could be in a worse state. Let's not forget, these men were trained killers. They were the elite of the American Army. They were rough, they were tough, they were mean. And that's not to mean that, I'm not trying to make them out as subhuman, but they had a job to do and they were trained to do it. And that's something we shouldn't forget. And in many ways, it's a great credit to both themselves and to the local population that they spent 12 months in the village, and the village survived, and they survived. There were a few pheasants went missing, a few ducks went missing, a few trout went missing, even a few deer went missing, I believe. But that was about as serious as it got. I think the point they started throwing hand grenades in the River Kennet was really where someone said, hey, come on boys, calm it down a bit. Of course they had to pay for everything they used as well, so if they destroyed a local landowner's fish, then they had to take it out of their pay and cop up for it. This is another shot inside the stable complex. The white structure on the left here just looks like a piece of tongue and groove boarding. As far as I can make out, that's actually a glider crate. Now the gliders that were towed from Ramsbury and Membury, Green Common, towed by the Dakotas or the troop carrier groups, they came not flat packed, but the wings were separate, they were down the side of the fuselage, and they were put in a great big wooden box. And when you didn't have anywhere to live other than a stable or a tent, a great big wooden box that was big enough to walk in, and about 40 feet long, if not more, 7 or 8 feet wide, made a very nice home. And a lot of them were purloined by all kinds of units for use in a sort of almost like a shantytown way. And as far as I can make out, that is what that is. But I've got no way of confirming it. The other interesting thing is the civilian coach, the bus, that's in this picture, which would tend to suggest that the men of A Company were about to go off somewhere, because they quite often were shipped out in buses to far-flung locations for manoeuvres, exercises. But we've got a complete mixture of uniform here. We've got a guy in shirt sleeves, a guy in his jumpsuit, a guy in just a combat jacket, and a guy in Class A. So the picture doesn't give any indication of the fact that they were getting ready to go. Maybe they just come back. Here we see another group, and this is an interesting picture. I put a square around the colour picture to show the location that the black and white picture is taken in. So this is taken in Michael Stepman's garden, as it now is. But the interesting thing is that the Screaming Eagle's patches on the shoulders of these two guys, clearly visible, which means that that particular photograph never went past the censor. The guy who took it obviously either didn't get it processed until he got back to the States after the war, or he processed it and managed to keep it to himself, because all the mail was censored. So if he processed that picture, had it processed, and tried to send it home, then the censor would have probably scraped away the emulsion on the photograph, or even cut a hole in the negative where the symbol was, so that in the event of that mail falling into the wrong hands, the enemy were unable to deduce what unit was pictured. Here we see two more groups of men. What do these pictures look like from the back? They kind of look overexposed from where I am down there. Just need the lights out. Would you like with the video with the lights out? Any better? Okay, these two photographs, so again, they're taken in front of what I believe is a glider box, probably the same one. They're both taken within the Hightown Stable Complex, I would imagine. On the left, Sergeant Charles Hudson and John Ross. And Hudson, as I say, was given a battlefield commission in Holland. So he was taken from a sergeant, from an enlisted rank, and made into an officer. Probably because all the officers had been killed, and they needed experienced men to lead the companies. For any of you that saw Band of Brothers, Carwood Lipton underwent a battlefield commission in Holland or Bastogne, possibly Bastogne. Sergeant Angelo Montrella, horsing around outside of the surviving stable block prior to D-Day. The weapon is a folding stock carbine, specially adapted version of the M1 carbine for airborne use. And if any of you come along tomorrow to see our display on the village green, I'm sure you'll see a folding stock carbine. I don't have one, but there must be somebody here who's brought one. Any takers? Perhaps you won't see one tomorrow. But that's quite a nice comparison of the stable blocks then and the surviving stable block now. PFC Creed Marriott Jr. carries his mess tins en route to or from mealtime at the stables. Now, mess time or meal times at the stables, we're not quite sure how it took place. There was some kind of central location where all the guys went to be fed. Something like a barn or some kind of covered hayrick. but not seen any photographs, and the accounts I've read about it aren't that graphic, and the veterans I've talked to haven't really been able to describe it that well. The stable pictured in colour is still standing just to the side of Michael Steadman's house, and that's quite a noteworthy survivor because that was the company office for A Company during their time in Aldbourne. So from September 43 through to August of 44, that little stable was the hub of activity for the platoon leaders, sergeants, in relation to A Company. And here we see a view looking from the village green to the Blue Boar pub. And Sarson Cottage here is the house that's been built within the courtyard of the stables in 1990. And the Blue Boar itself was quite a popular drinking establishment. I'm not sure if it was actually a pub during the war, because having talked to Clarence Hester, who was E Company Executive Officer, and then he became the 1st Battalion CO in the 506, he described it as a private drinking club. And I've not been in there for a few years, but there used to be a sign on the wall in there which said the Kegler's Club, and that was the name given to the drinking club that was in there during the war. And Clarence Hester had this sign, plaque, script, it was like a scroll in a frame, had it made probably 10 or 15 years ago, and sent it to the pub, and it used to be in the bar on display. He was very good friends with Eric Brown, the late Eric Brown, and they kept in contact, I believe, right up until their respective deaths. Another view within the stable complex showing the then and now before Sarson Cottage was built. Just shows stables numbers 5 and 6 on the end here, which are now gone. Now, moving away from the stables, the other main encampment in the village was the Farm Lane Rectory Wood hutted camp. Where the present-day football field is, that was the drill field with Nissen huts around it, known as the Quadrangle by some of the guys, some of the veterans. And whilst this map isn't to scale, this area here is the private council houses that were on Farm Lane, which have subsequently mostly been demolished and the area has been redeveloped. But that was drawn from memory in 1992 by Sergeant Burton P. Christensen of E Company 506, who was a great help to me in trying to establish the layout of the camp. And he did quite a good job of remembering it 48 years after he'd last been there. And here we see the Quadrangle, 3rd Platoon, E Company. You can see a glider crate there, 2 Nissen huts, and the council houses behind. Taken in November 43, provided by Carwood C. or C. Carwood Lipton to his friends. Here he is. He was the individual I mentioned just now, had the Battlefield Commission featured in Band of Brothers. And anybody who's read Band of Brothers, if I was to give you a roll call of the names of the individuals on that photograph, you would recognise an awful lot of them. I mentioned earlier about my feelings about Stephen Ambrose's book, Band of Brothers. That isn't to take anything away from television production, as far as I was concerned. You have to gloss over little nuances of detail which may be wrong or inappropriate, and take it for what it is, what it was, which I think is an absolutely superb representation of the hell of war and what these guys went through. It's no wonder they hold Aldbourne in such high esteem, having spent 12 months here, when you see what they went through after they left here. And there's another then and now, just to give an indication. The colour picture isn't taken from exactly the same location, but the tree line up on the hill is hardly changed 50 years on, or 60 years on as it now is, virtually. And a group of 2nd Battalion men on the Farm Lane camp. Mike Ranney on the far end, featured again in Band of Brothers. Jack Agnew, he was a Pathfinder, member of the Filthy 13, which was a group of somewhat notorious reputation. I don't know the full history of it, but I'm sure some of the guys here will know a bit more about it. And here we see a veteran returning to the Farm Lane camp, taken in September '94. Eugene Gilbreth, headquarters 2nd Battalion. He was overjoyed to come back. It was his first visit since he'd left in '44, and he was like a little kid, skipping along. Couldn't believe it. He was very disappointed that there wasn't more to actually see that he remembered, but obviously once we got him on the football field, he knew he was there. And that's a larger version of the Nissen Hut slide we saw earlier. Again, on Farm Lane camp. This was where the 506 medics were billeted. See the push bike outside with the musette bag on the handles. Someone's essential mode of conveyance. And here we see Richard Dick Red Wright. He was known as Red because he had ginger hair. That's a picture of him inside Nissen Hut on Farm Lane camp. As he entitled it on the back when he sent it to me, Winning the War in Aldbourne. And there he is again at his house in California with Tom Potter, whose father was in E Company and served with Dick. Right, on the plan of Farm Lane Camp that I showed earlier, some of the buildings on there were referred to as tar paper shacks. And tar paper shack is a strange description for any kind of building. But I believe that what these three guys are stood in front of is a tar paper shack. It's just got that look about it. So they're 3 506 medics, and as they're in front of the tar paper shack, it's a fair bet that it's taken at Farm Lane / Rectory Wood camp. That picture's actually in colour, but when I scanned it, the colour wouldn't come out, so I showed it in black and white. And this is a more interesting view. Gives you an overview of the Rectory Wood part of the Farm Lane Rectory Wood camp. And the trees that are visible to the left of the massed ranks there, they're still in place. I think the housing estate, is it called Turnpike? Yeah. You go up through Turnpike and you go into Rectory Wood, and those trees are still in situ. And before they developed Rectory Wood, I did go up there with a metal detector, but all I could find was ring pools and milk bottle tops, Coke cans. Didn't find a single relic. Marshall Clayton Oliver. This is quite an interesting photograph. It only came to me last week from this gentleman's daughter. She'd seen an appeal of mine on the internet for information and photographs, and she sent this, which is actually on Roger Day's website as well. And it's taken at the Farm Lane camp, the Rectory Wood camp. Got his jumpsuit on there. Apologies for the quality of this picture. It was actually scanned from a printed version within the 101st Airborne Association magazine, The Screaming Eagle. But I've included it because it is quite noteworthy, because it shows a group of guys in Aldbourne. Again, a couple of which never made it back. And the picture was entitled that it's taken in the Searchlight area, where Headquarters Company 2nd Battalion were billeted. Now, the Searchlight area doesn't mean anything to me. My guess it was Farm Lane, Rectory Wood, I don't know. Any locals got any idea? Aldbourne Road. Is that where the egg packing place? Alright, so what, it will be up behind there? Was there like a sports field there, or? Right. Were there huts up there?
Oh yes, yes.
Right. Oh, I see. Well, they must have taken it over or been co-located. Oh, interesting. Oh, that's something I've learned tonight. And another group, E Company 506. Again, there'll be names on there that people who've watched Band of Brothers or read Band of Brothers will recognise. But it's particularly interesting because the guy who's the worst visible individual on the shot, far right, this one, is Cleveland O. Petty. And the name Petty is still visible on the wall of the surviving stable block in Michael Steadman's garden. One of the few names that is visible. And fortunately, when checking the register or the roster of members of the 506, there was only one Petty in the whole regiment. So it's a fairly safe bet it's him. On manoeuvres in the Aldbourne area, A Company man seem to have lost the bottom of the caption. But again, another one who didn't come back. We saw Tom Potter earlier with Dick Wright in California. This is Tom's brothers, Tim and Dan, in Aldbourne in 1999. And that's a picture of their father, George Potter, who was in E Company, outside his billet in Aldbourne. Again, the location I'm not too sure of. It doesn't give not an awful lot of the picture to enable you to identify it. But that was an interesting. I placed an appeal on the internet for information on the 506. Shortly after, I got an email from Dan Potter explaining who he was in relation to his father being in E Company, and saying that him and his brother were coming over shortly. I think it was about a week later. And could I help them? So met them at Swindon, picked them up, brought them to Aldbourne, showed them around, took them to Ramsbury, did the World War II Heritage Trail in the Kennet Valley, and put them on a train back to London. And they were over the moon, absolutely over the moon. Especially when we went to the old firing range site at Chiltern Folio and kicked through the ploughed field as it was then. And gave them a handful of carbine shells dated 1943 and 44. And that was the icing on the cake for them. In fact, Dan was going to try and come for this weekend, but work commitments prevented him because he's actually a reenactor himself. I referred earlier to the council houses on Farm Lane that were demolished. I think it was about 92 and they were demolished. But before they were demolished, I managed to get this recreation. I took the black and white picture to the front door of the house on Farm Lane, which I guesstimated was about right for where the picture was taken. Knocked on the door, and this guy came to the door in his string vest, and I was obviously the last person he wanted to see. And I said, I've got this picture taken in the wall, I think it's taken in your garden. Oh yeah. Any chance of me going up the garden and getting a comparative shot? Oh yeah, do what you like, mate. Do what you like. The place is being demolished anyway. So it took a bit of manoeuvring, you know, kicking down a few stinging nettles and whatnot. But I think I did it quite well. And I guess it's history now because those houses have been demolished. And there's Robert Burr Smith of E Company. This is a nice picture. It's a post-Normandy photograph because he's wearing his presidential unit citation on his right breast. It's Private Don King, E Company 506. And as I say there, it shows to good effect the superior American uniforms that assisted the GIs in being such a hit with the girls. A studio shot taken after D-Day. He does look quite dashing, doesn't he? Whereas this guy looks quite menacing. Imagine sending this home to your mum. It's quite clever. I mean, it's he's obviously gone to some thought to put the picture together. But it's interesting. He's wearing his 506 Paradise patch on his M41 jacket, and he's still alive and well, living in California. And this picture was provided to me from him by the Potter brothers, who have made it their business to get to know as many 506 E Company and 2nd Battalion men as they can, because obviously that's what their father was with. Here's another E Company man, then and now, although the now is 8 years ago. Les Hashi, again another name that was featured in Band of Brothers, the TV dramatisation. A Normandy replacement. That photograph was taken, I believe it was in Belgium, but it was definitely after they left Aldbourne. And the kind of picture with Clive, my brother, taken in '94 when he came back on a veterans tour. And as I'll say on the caption there, he left his laundry in Aldbourne when the 506 left. They moved out reasonably short notice, and he didn't have a chance to retrieve it. And the first letter he ever wrote to me, he asked me if I'd try and find out what happened to it. Like if I'd found out I was going to give it back, right? Another nice comparison here of my brother Clive, who not only obtained the black and white shots, but also made it his business to go and get the recreation. And this is Lottage Road, which is... That photograph is taken for the reenactors amongst us about 150 yards down the road. And having wandered down there earlier on before the hall was unlocked, it is quite amazing how little it's changed. I think even the fence post that the gate's on is probably the same one. I say that's Norman Sandefur, 1st Platoon medic, pictured in the front of the photograph at the bottom, and living in Stone Cottage, as they knew it then, Kay's Cottage as it is now. The guys in there, and him in particular, became very good friends with the neighbours, Mr. and Mrs. Fred Deacon. We'll see a photograph of those later. Another Lottage Road then and now, Private Charles J. McClernand, who was killed in action on June 8th. He just survived 2 days in Normandy after leaving Aldbourne. And again, A Company 506. Nice to have these shots. Clive only got these, was it early this year, Clive? February, yeah. A bit like discovering buried treasure, finding photographs like this. Or it is to historians anyway, those of us that are craving this kind of stuff. Again, another one of Norman Sandefur on Lottage Road, outside of Stone Cottage, and the comparison view as it is today. And even more on Lottage Road, a 506 A Company beer party. There's an interesting story because one of the guys pictured on the photograph, PFC James Slick Hohenscheit, actually was a native of Wichita in Kansas. And I was in Wichita a few years back, staying with a veteran from the 437th Troop Carrier Group in Ramsbury, who were based in Ramsbury. And we were looking through the telephone directory to try and find another veteran. And there was it was the Yellow Pages and domestic sort of combined. I can't honestly remember, but I saw an advert in the Yellow Pages for Hohenscheit Plumbing. And I thought, wow, that's a name you don't come across every day. And I was talking to Donald Baguette sometime later and mentioned that I'd seen a plumbing company with the name of Hohenscheit advertised in a Wichita Yellow Pages. And he said, oh yeah, Slick Hohenscheit came from Kansas and started a plumbing business after the war. So next time I was in Wichita, I made a point of looking him up. And he came around to the house of the veteran I was staying with and had a very entertaining afternoon with him and his wife. So it's nice to have met him and to have done the link like that. Let's see which one he is. This one. And again, you can see that little band of buddies was somewhat depleted by the end of the war. Interesting also to note that the civilian car has got white rims or white edges on the mudguards for blackout purposes. More men on Lottage Road. They obviously didn't know what to do one afternoon, so they just done a photo shoot. Can't knock them for that all these years later. And again, 3 of them didn't come back. More of the same. Well, you can't get too much of this stuff, I don't think. He's actually sat on his kit bag, and to his right there's a box of K rations, American Army ration boxes, and he's got some kind of trench knife stuck in the top of it. And the kids are playing in the street, oblivious of the American presence. I suppose it was just an everyday sight to them at that point in time. 3 more on Lottage Road. For the ladies doing the teas, I think I'll show you probably 3 or 4 more slides and then we'll break for 10 minutes. Yeah? Charles Donahue, Dennis Haley and Norman Sandford. Obviously they got bored of just posing for the camera with their buddies, so they started to do a bit of action sequences with their Thompsons. And here's Norman Sandford with his local friends, Mr. and Mrs. Fred Deacon, Cecilia Deacon, their daughter, and Tom Wilkins. So I'm sure there's a few people in here who recognise those old faces. The letter that he sent my brother Clive with these photographs was very glowing about his friendship with the Deacons and how good they were to him, and how they corresponded with his sister in the States. And it's nice to have photographs like this to show the sort of the social interaction that took place. Thousands of miles from home. And here's a bit more local social interaction. This photograph was given to me by the late Molly Lunn, and it shows her daughter Maura in the arms of Lieutenant William Huddleston, flanked by Alfred Frosty Winter, another lieutenant. I don't really know much on Alfred Frosty Winter, other than the fact that when Dick Winters from E Company 506 came back to Aldbourne in 1991, and I already had this photograph in my possession at that point, I said to him, "You're not Frosty Winters, are you?" "Hell no! Don't mention that man's name to me." And obviously didn't agree, but I couldn't get out of him what the reason was they didn't agree, because something went on. He wasn't going to tell me anymore, other than the fact he definitely, most certainly, was not Frosty Winter. Now when I went to see Molly Lunn in 1990, I think it was, 1991, she gave me that photograph. She also gave me a pair of boots that had belonged to her husband, which had belonged to Frosty Winter. And unfortunately, they weren't the much prized Corcoran jug boots. They were the slightly less prized infantry ankle boots. And her husband had used them in the garden after the war, virtually until his death. And they were really just waiting to be thrown out. So I managed to persuade her that I could give them a good home. And they're in my collection now. They can't be worn because they're just too far gone, but they're just a nice item to have. And the other item she gave me, which will mean more to the reenactors here, is a genuine helmet first aid package. It's been opened, but it's entirely intact. That would have been tied to the front of a helmet. Contains first aid, dressing, tourniquet, and a couple of substances which most of the ones you find these days don't have in them. It's quite nice to have. Another nice photograph, again which Clive's provided. Private Don King from E Company with identical twins from Aldbourne, Molly and Joan. Well, I was just going to say, are they here tonight? Because Clive thought they would be, but because I don't know their surnames, and I didn't know their maiden names, I could only put their first names. But I think I can see them. Can you give us a wave, ladies? Am I right in thinking that's coming up from Aldbourne? Badenhill, right. Very nice picture. I think that's that kind of picture encapsulates all the good things about the American presence in the local area. And thank you for making it available to Clive and for me to use. Much appreciated. All of the Lottage Road photographs with all of the group in. The lady who was kind enough to provide them to my brother is here in the audience. Sonia. Sorry, I didn't get your surname. Scott. Sonia Scott. So a big thank you to Sonia for making them available, because it's things like that which makes a presentation or a talk like this come to life. The photographs that you're seeing tonight have taken 13 years to gather. And the treasure that Sonia came up with earlier this year was marvellous. You know, we thought we'd drained all the local availability of World War II pictures of the 506 and the environment, local environment, and then just when you're not looking, bang, another lot comes along. So let's hope there's some more out there. Right, this is a copy of the notice that was handed out to all Allied troops on the eve of D-Day. As I put it here, toward the end of May 1944, after almost 9 months in residence, the men of the 506 left Aldbourne for the airfields from where they would depart. He was the airborne spearhead of the D-Day landings. Prior to their departure for the continent, each man was given a copy of General Eisenhower's message as reproduced left. For the men of the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, their longest day was dawning. With a Norman Collier there. Now, I've made a number of trips to the States to attend veterans reunions, to meet veterans and stay with veterans. And in 1992, I made my second visit to Michigan to stay with Donald Burgett and his wife Twyla. And whilst we were at Don's house one evening talking about what to do the following day, I just dropped into conversation that I noticed that Don Grimstall, who was also an A Company 506 veteran who'd been in the village, lived in the same state in Jackson. And I said to Don, "When did you last see the other Don?" And he said, 20 years ago or whatever. So I said, "Well, why don't we go and see him?" Okay. So I phoned him up, hadn't spoken to him for years, and said we were coming to see him. And that's what we did. So there's a picture of me looking somewhat thinner. believe it. I've got 32-inch trousers on 36-inch waist tonight. And there we are, all three of us together, and the two comparative shots. And both really nice guys. Really nice guys. I keep trying to persuade Don Burgett to come back, because since Currahee was published in '67, in the last 4 years, he's had his 3 follow-on volumes published. And they've all been highly successful in terms of sales, especially in the light of Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers. But I haven't managed to persuade him to come back yet. I've promised him there's a pint of warm beer on the bar at the Blue Boar, but it hasn't done the trick yet. This is an example of the kind of item that troopers could buy and send home. This is actually a post-war greetings from the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment on their 3rd anniversary. So it's a postcard, and done in a cartoon fashion. You can see the UK there and the map of Europe, and a picture of a donut there, Bastogne, where they were surrounded. And when the fighting was over and the Nazi foe had been defeated, the combined command which had ruled the Allied forces during the fighting was dismantled. General Ike relinquished command, and as with his D-Day message of encouragement to the troops, a similar message was prepared to say farewell. And these, both this and the D-Day one were both sent to me by veterans, so they'd kept them all these years and passed them on to me, so I'm very fortunate, and they found a good home. There's 2 of Don Burgett's follow-on books. If anybody wants to read about the activities of the 506, then I would recommend any of Don Burgett's 4 books: Currahee, 7 Roads to Hell, The Road to Arnhem. I'm trying to think what the 4th one's called. Any takers? No. And the middle book is the 101st Airborne at Normandy by Mark Bando. Another very good reference book. Lots of photographs, information, tells you where they were, what they did, who did what. So that concludes the 506 element of my presentation. Maybe in a few years' time it will be longer when I've gathered more information, if more information comes to light, and more photographs. But I think you'll agree, a picture paints 1,000 words. And really doing a presentation like this without having any period material to work with would be very, very difficult. So moving away from Aldbourne and the 506, I'm going to digress slightly to Ramsbury. And up on the escarpment above Ramsbury village was the 437th Troop Carrier Group, 53rd Troop Carrier Wing, US 9th Army Air Force. The 437th came to Ramsbury in February of '44 with their C-47 aircraft, Dakotas, to you and I. And they dropped paratroopers, they towed gliders, the American Waco CG-4A and the British-built Horsa. And this is Jared F. Skidmore. Can you stand up please, Mr. Skidmore?
I am standing up.
Now, as you can see, he hasn't changed a bit. And Jim was a pilot at Ramsbury, originally a co-pilot and the first pilot at Ramsbury with the 86th Squadron of the 437th Troop Carrier Group. And he flew over on Thursday? Came in on Thursday? To Milden Hall? Wednesday. In order to be with us for this weekend. We couldn't get any 506 veterans, but we got the next best thing. And pound for pound, he's well worth it. So I've got a few photographs to show here of Skid, and please when the talk finishes, do take a moment to come and have a chat with him, because he's quite a character. So there he is. Even got his name painted on the window under the window on his aircraft. Joward F. Skidmore III.
That's why they call me Jim.
Sorry?
That's why they call me Jim.
That's why they call him Jim. We all call him Jim or Skid. So there's a picture of the aircraft that Jim flew with his pilot, Jesse Parrish. And as I put there, upon arrival in the UK and deployment to Ramsbury, Skid was co-pilot to Jesse Parrish. Jesse is seen here leaning from the cockpit of their Douglas C-47 Lisbell, named in honour of their respective spouses. And here's the crew. Skid on the left at the back, Jesse Parrish on the right at the back, and the three enlisted men in front of them. Beneath Lisbell, which they came over to the UK in early '44. Came by Ascension Island, didn't you, Jim?
Yes.
Down through Brazil, across the Amazon, across to Ascension Island. Am I right in thinking that you came without a navigator, Jim?
That's correct.
So were you flying on your own or with a group?
Well, when we left Ascension Island, the group commander said, make a 180-degree turn, but he didn't say what direction. I went down 50 feet above the water. I figured I couldn't miss Africa. 4 hours, 50 feet over the water, and we were only 20 miles off course when we hit Liberia.
20 miles off course. Good grief. I bet there was a big sigh of relief when you hit Liberia as well.
Yes, indeed. What happened to Lisbell?
There's a question. Do you know the answer, Jim? What happened to Lisbell? When did you last see Lisbell?
I got my airplane the day after D-Day, so I flew the second mission in my own plane. And Lisbell was there when I left
Right.
Europe.
It's interesting. I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that the aircraft that was piloted by the 85th Squadron operations officer on D-Day, a guy by the name of Joe Antrim, who Skid will know well, his aircraft ended up in the Peruvian Air Force, and in 1986 was still in active service with the Peruvian Air Force. It's the same old story about the C-47, the Dakota. The only thing to replace a Dakota is another Dakota. So there's an awful lot of them still around.
My plane ended up with TWA.
Is that Cherobel?
Yeah. They wouldn't give me a job.
I should get you up the front with a mic, Jim. So here we see Jim on the right.
That's water in my hand.
Yeah. That's not what you wrote on the back of the photograph when you sent it to your wife. I know, because I've got the photograph. So this is up at Ramsbury Airdrome, outside the Officers' Club. Jesse Parrish, Ed Widdick, and Joward F. Skidmore. Nice picture. I wish you still had that shirt, Jim. And as Jim mentioned just now, after D-Day he was given his own aircraft. He flew the second mission with his own aircraft, and this particular picture is of his own aircraft, Cherobel. So that was when you became a first pilot?
The day after D-Day.
The day after D-Day. And what was the... I know the story, Lisbell, but who was Cheryl?
Cheryl was my co-pilot's wife's name.
Right. Co-pilot's wife's name. Okay. And who was your co-pilot?
My wife's middle name was Bell.
Right. And who was your co-pilot?
Sarah was his name.
Sarah.
C-E-R-A. I had several of them. Yeah.
And here's a nice picture. Well, actually, I'll get Jim to tell the story of this picture rather than me tell it, because I'll get it from the horse's mouth. Can you tell us what's going on in this picture, Jim?
Well, this was taken a week after D-Day, and the chap on the left was a radio operator in the 85th Squadron. The gentleman in the middle was a high school friend of mine from Kansas City. And the one on the right is me.
So the guy on the middle was from a different unit, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a troop carrier pilot, however. But,
so did he search you out?
he and I think there's another picture similar to this. There were two other fellows came over. They were both troop carrier pilots and both high school graduates when I graduated.
A good picture. It's interesting that this method of projecting the pictures, you do actually lose quality. I mean, these pictures are quite good anyway, but when you see them, you see the real picture, they're extremely good quality. There he is again. Larking around for the camera, complete with personal bicycle.
I really didn't have any whiskers then.
It's quite interesting that all of the aircraft and the officers were issued with a bicycle when they came to Ramsbury. And you see a number of photographs of the bicycles with the individual officer's name on a tag beneath the crossbar. And I believe Clive now possesses that particular tag. Is that right, Clive?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've got one from my good friend from Wichita, Max Demuth, who was an 85th Squadron Navigator, Lieutenant Demuth.
Did Clive tell you where he hung my name?
Do I want to know?
On the bathroom.
In the bathroom? Let's not go there. Right. That's a small part of a typical 437th mass formation, as flown by skid, and others, many others. The bulges beneath the aircraft, which you can just make out on these two aircraft, are parapacks, carrying equipment for the troops. They would be dropped together with when the troops dropped, such that they all landed in roughly the same area, such that the troops had the equipment they needed, such as artillery pieces, etc. So this picture proves that those aircraft are actually on a mission, maybe a practice mission, maybe a combat mission. And that's just a small part of the kind of formation that would have emanated from Ramsbury and from Membry. I think at its height, Ramsbury was able to put between 80 and 100 C-47s in the air. You can imagine when they were all lined up on the runway with engines turning, you could have heard them from here in Aldbourne, I'm sure. And what a sight that must have been to see that fly over. I went to the Air Atlantique 1950s air show 2 years ago at Coventry, where they put 7 Dakotas up in the air together, and that made all the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, sent shivers down my spine. I can't imagine it, what it must have been like to see 70 or 700. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings to an end the formal part of my presentation. As I put here, we thank you for your interest. That's my brother Clive and myself. I've been researching the local GI presence for 13 years. Clive has played an active part in assisting with that for at least the last 10. And as I say here, the images you've seen tonight have taken over 13 years to gather with the help of many World War II American veterans, their families and individuals here in the UK, some of whom are here tonight. This presentation is dedicated to all of the American servicemen who came to this area in World War II, many of whom knew it as their last permanent home, and to whom all of us owe a great debt of gratitude for the sacrifices they made in order that we may live as we do today. And if you are able to assist with additional material, information, or World War II items of interest, then please make contact tonight, and I know some of you already have them. I would just like to add that during the intermission, a couple of people came up to chat. We have a genuine 101st serving officer with us in the room. Could I get you to introduce yourself, sir?
Captain Ben Everhart from Actually, 502nd Regiment from the 101st.
502nd.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you for coming along.
My pleasure.
Look forward to speaking to you some more.
Thank you.
We also have one of the actors who was in Band of Brothers, who came forward in the intermission and asked me about a photograph of the character that he played during the series. So we'll make sure you get a copy of that. It was Dukeman? Bill Dukeman. Yeah, so nice to see you here. Thanks for coming along. Now, I know some people want to go to the pub, and far be it for me to stand in the way of them. If anybody wants to do a questions and answers session, I'm more than happy to have a go at answering questions. I don't confess to be the world's greatest expert on the 506, but I'll give it a shot. I mean, is it worth saying, anybody who wants to leave now for the pub, if they go now and then we'll have some questions and answers afterwards? I'll stand back. Anybody want to ask any questions? Yes, sir.
Have you got a photograph of Bill Winters?
Of Dick Winters?
Dick Winters, I'm sorry.
I don't have a photograph other than what's been printed commercially, other than a picture of myself with him in 1992. But nothing in the presentation, unfortunately. But he's still around. He's even more active now after Band of Brothers than he was before. I went over and I spent a week with him in 1992 at his house in Pennsylvania, and he got a couple of other guys from E Company. Lewis Nixon, who he shared his room with at the post office in Aldbourne, he came, and there were a couple of A Company guys. One of the ones who was photographed here earlier, Henry Boyd, came along, and we had a real good bull session. And as many of the veterans often say to me when they get together, listen, because some of the stories may be true. I'm off to the States in a fortnight's time to attend the reunion of Jim's unit, so presumably you'll be there, Jim, won't you?
No, I won't be there.
Oh, he's going to bow out.
It's time to come here instead.
Well, that's a fair exchange, I guess. Fair exchange. But for any of you reenactors that are here, if you don't have any contact with veterans, then do it while you can, because it's an education. It really is. It's priceless. The time you can spend with these guys and get to know them, find out what they did, how they did it, where they did it, stand back and then try and work out what they told you is true. And but it's so good. They're a great bunch of people, and I thank you for your attention, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime when I've got some more information. Thanks a lot.
Well, 59 years ago, at this very spot, I was stood here with a group of young American soldiers. They was all arguing who could shoot the cockerel on the church tower, the weathercock. Eventually, one of them went into his billets the other side of the wall, come back with his rifle, lines the cockerel up, bang. There's the old from that day. And this is the old cockerel. He stayed up on the church till the 1990s, and it's just been replaced now with a new cockerel. And there's the bullet hole. Still there today.
At the time, you see, being so green, I haven't got a clue what this meant. But it says, "Dear Audrey, to the silver wings of love, may they never moult a feather, until your little shoes and my jump boots are under the bed together."
With their cans, their mess
tins.
Yeah, for their meal. And then just to embarrass you more, one of them would say, "I was right." There you are, a little teenager with about 60.
A bit embarrassing.
60 Americans didn't know where to look. She scratched
Marching with them up the Four Boroughs track and that, you know. And one time we come across the fields up past the cops just at Four Boroughs. They'd had a minefield led down and we run across it and boom, you know. I remember all the ambulances coming down from Membury, bringing the wounded
Oh,
back and
yes,
taking them
I remember seeing
up to Marlborough on the common, weren't they?